Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. Today, my guest is the amazing Dr. Jonathan S. Marion. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. We were talking a little bit before the show. You're a world traveler and you're changing lives. I can only imagine all over the world. And so I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your time and sharing your gift with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Jody. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
No problem, no problem. You have some very interesting insight in the world of transformational coaching. I was definitely looking at everything that you've been doing along the way. So you have a psychology background, correct?
It's actually in psychological anthropology, so the permeable border between personality and culture.
Okay, we're definitely gonna have to dive into that a little bit because I'm very interested to learn more about that. But let's go back. You know, what is Jonathan all about, and where did he start, and how did you get so interested in where you are now?
Yeah, so there was really a huge pivot point for me, sort of two phases of it in 2019.
Mm,
Before that, I did have an academic background. My PhD is in psychological anthropology. I've always been interested in, you know, how people think about things and how they make meaning of the world. And we never are in isolation from our context, right? What's the culture around us? What's our upbringing? What are the things we internalize?
hmm
And so that was what was really interesting to me. Uh, at first, as psychology and political philosophy as an undergrad, and then as cultural anthropology and psychological anthropology in graduate school. And I was then working as a professor of cultural anthropology and on a research trip to Brazil in the first half of 2019. And I remember sitting in a good friend's living room who let me, use a small bedroom in the back when I was visiting, and realizing that I felt more at home staying in this small bedroom that was smaller than my closet of my house.
Wow.
And it really made me go, wait a minute, what is that about?
Mm,
And the more I sort of interrogated myself about that, it was about quality of relationships, that the people who I was friends with in Brazil knew and cared about Jonathan the person, loved Jonathan,
mm,
not the external accomplishments and accolades. So they knew what I did professionally, but unlike the university, they didn't care what was my latest publication, my latest teaching evaluation, my latest grant, my latest conference presentation, my latest board membership.
yeah.
And so that really made me think about that if I stayed in academia, I was never going to have a life that was really aligned with the things that mattered most to me. And so
Mm,
that's what sort of started me thinking about pivoting away from what ended up being a 20-year academic career.
wow.
Mm, And just to elaborate on that slightly, when I then thought about what were the parts of the job I'd had, well, as a tenured faculty member, 40% of my job was research. Well, okay, I was good at it. I'd published 4 academic books, but I don't love doing that. Okay, so
Mm,
that's not it. And 20% was service. Okay, I'm good at it. I'd been the president of 2 national organizations. I don't love doing that. So that wasn't it. And
mm,
40% was teaching. But it wasn't the standing in front of a classroom and lecturing. It was really those informal conversations, the first 5 to 10 minutes before or after class, where students had their own questions,
yes.
or working with my graduate students who I don't run a lab where I assign them something. I'm helping them figure out what are their questions and how they're going to find their own answers.
Ooh, that's
So
good.
helping you figure out your questions and how you're going to find your own answers, that to me was like, okay, there's something in the coaching and life coaching space.
Hmm
But again, find your own answers. Like, I didn't want it to be one of those types of things where I had a client who, oh, I've been coaching them for 3 years. I'm always here to support people, but that's not what, gets me up in the morning of
Yeah.
seeing and supporting the same person on an ongoing basis long term. It's no, I want to make a difference. I want to empower them. I want to support them to empower themselves. to really make a transformation that lets them live a more deeply meaningful and fulfilling life. So that's
Yes.
was sort of the first real pivot point for me.
That's awesome.
And that realization was in the early part of 2019. And then I'd been in Brazil doing research, and also I do some partner dancing, primarily Brazilian
I
zouk
saw
now.
that. I had to look that up. I had to look that up. I was like, ooh, that's interesting. Yes.
And I was working with one instructor in Sao Paulo,
Hmm.
and we got in this conversation about the difference between finding value in doing versus just being.
I saw that on your website.
And I really thought I understood it. I really thought I was on team being, if you will. But
Hmm.
then in the beginning of November of 2019, when I was back in the US, I had a severe spinal injury and nerve damage. And for 5 weeks, I couldn't even roll over on a side on my own.
Wow.
And that was a real existential challenge of, do I have the same value as a human being if I can't do all the things that I used to do?
Wow.
I don't know if I'm ever going to walk again, let alone dance. I don't know if I'm ever going to not have this excruciating nerve pain.
Hmm.
Like, what's my value? Am I the same Jonathan? Do I have the same value as myself? And
Yes.
so that was the second part of the real challenge that said, as I came out of it, as I faced those questions for myself, as I was then returning to training um, and getting more certifications in coaching. I'd been coaching for a long time already, but
Hmm.
not so much in an official certified capacity.
Right.
Um, and so that was the second part of the real pivot for me,
Mm.
was really, and so then I designed my whole sort of coaching paradigm around being as sort of the framework.
Yes. I saw that. And I love acronyms. And it's not just because I was in the military, but but I want to touch on one thing real quick before I go into the being, because I was very interested in that. Um, but you mentioned something that kind of hit home with me because it's something that a lot of veterans go through, and it's also something that a lot of people go through in corporate America. And now I'm learning, you're going through it coming out of academia. And so it's really all very similar. But I think, and I don't know if society really plays a big role on it. I think it does, but we tend to tie our identity to the roles that we have in our lives. And so when those roles change, right? And I've gone through this a lot in my life as well. And that's exactly what you're talking about, where it's like, okay, I'm not able to operate in that capacity at this time. So now who am I? That's interesting. So it's interesting to hear it from someone else. I hear it from, like I said, I hear it from a lot of different people around, but that's exactly what you were talking about too. And it's interesting how these life-changing events are kind of what put us there, you know?
Absolutely. And to your point, exactly, think about when you talk to people and, are asking them about themselves or they're asking about you. So often we say something, I would have said something like, oh, I am a,
Yeah.
cultural anthropology
Oh,
professor,
yes.
not I work as a cultural anthropology
Oh
professor.
my goodness. The timing on this is so perfect. I started changing my wording about a year ago, and I every now and then I'll catch myself still, but I really, really challenge myself to not say I am. Now, I will say I am a veteran, right? Like that's not going to change, right?
Mhm.
But there's a lot of things like that's what you're saying. That is what we do. We tend to tie these titles to who we are. So what happens when those titles change? We lose who we are. So I love that you said that. Thank you. I hope everybody out there heard what you said. It's when we say I am. So I want you to explain it because, I don't want to be the one talking, but I want you to talk about it a little bit. Like what happens when we say I am?
Yeah, well, so again, we're attaching our identification. We're saying that is who I am as a human being.
Hmm.
And it's not. It's what your current job is. It's what your current employment is. It's what your current role is.
Hmm.
But that's not who you are.
Right.
I'm Jonathan. I am not a professor, or I really identify with being a life coach and a transformational one, so I sometimes
Hmm.
do still say it,
Yes.
but it's in the sense of even if I wasn't working for and being compensated for it, I would still identify as that. And it's
Hmm.
not only from that. Um, but I think all too often we do attach our identity. And so when do we start with, I am a brother, I am a son, I am a partner, I am you know, we don't tend to lead with that. And so we're over identifying with work. And I think that's very much part of Western society and, overly privileging type A personalities, and it's all about accomplishing and doing, which, yeah, it's important to accomplish some things.
Hmm.
But when we over identify with that and we lose track of, when we rest, when we recuperate, that is in our own service.
Hmm.
That is not wasting time. That is not procrastinating. That is not being frivolous.
Yes, I 100%, 1,000% agree with you right now. Hey, that's so true because, and it's something it's habitually, I think it's just programmed in us, like you said. I mean, we start out at an early age where, we are something, right? We're told we are something. And so because we're told we're something, we adopt that, right?
Absolutely. Think about even again, it's not to say everyone, but what's typical of little kids coming home from school. What did you do today? What and do,
Mm-hmm.
not how did you feel today? What
Right.
was important to you today? Um, you know, was anything meaningful? What was special?
Yeah.
It's about the what and it's about the doing. And
Yeah.
so we internalize that long before we even start to consciously recognize the emphasis that our society puts on external accomplishment.
Yeah. And the problem with that, right, is when we have those titles as our identity, as who we address ourselves as, then what happens when, maybe we don't end up operating in that space or that thing doesn't work out or, whatever the case may be. Now, guess what? This is something that I talk about a lot, where now what we tend to do is, I am a failure. That's the problem. So now we're tying our identity to that thing that maybe didn't work out. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think part of the issue there is how little control we actually have over most of life.
Mm.
And so
Yes.
I'm sure almost everyone listening has heard, life is what you make it. And I think the intention behind that is good,
Yeah.
but it's totally inaccurate
Yeah.
because how much control do we actually have over circumstances? And so, as cliche as it might be, the version I've heard that I think is far more accurate is life is 10% how we make it, 90% how we take it.
That's good. That's good. Can you say that one more time, please?
Sure. Life is 10% how we make it and 90% how we take it.
Mm. So explain that a little bit for everybody that's out there.
Sure. So things happen, right?
Hmm.
And there are some things that are expected, some things that are surprises, some things that are really fortuitous, some things that are challenging and even traumatic.
Hmm.
And those things were all real. And I think there's a real problem with toxic positivity and trying to, always find the good in the powerful and everything.
Hmm.
Um, because there are things that are problematic, but it's then up
Right.
to us. What do we do with that? Where do we go with that? Do we say something bad or challenging has happened and get stuck on that and even over identify with that?
Mm.
Or, fall prey to the, oh, woe is me, or it isn't fair, which might be true.
Yeah.
Or do we say, okay, this happened. Now, how do I want to respond? How do I want to show up? How do I want to proceed, given that this is what did happen?
Mm.
And so one of the things that I found for myself, and I work with a lot of clients and audiences around, is the trap of should, right? Um, my boss should have recognized my work. My
Mm,
coworkers should have done their fair share. My kids should have listened to me. I should have gone to the gym. And as one of my early trainers in the coaching space pointed out, should is fighting with what is.
that's good.
Should is fighting with what is. And so I invite anyone listening, grab a piece of paper, draw a line down the middle, and every time you catch yourself thinking or saying a should, on one side of the line, if it's about yourself, just write it down.
Hmm.
Don't have to do anything else. On the other side, if it's about anything external to yourself, whether it's someone else, whether it's the weather, you don't have to do anything with it. But just at night, before you go to bed, go through, cross out should, and rewrite it with could. My boss could have
So
recognized
good.
my effort. My coworker could have done their fair share. My kid could have listened to me. I could have gone to the gym. And if you just do that for a week or two, you'll start to notice patterns of what are the topics around which you have shoulds for yourself and others,
Mm,
which means what are the topics around which you're fighting with what is.
hmm.
And as you start to become more conscious of it, when you write it down, you'll be able to catch it even as you're thinking it and maybe start pivoting away from that.
I love that. That's really good. That's a good exercise. And it is something that, we tend to, like you said, based on our life, in the past, things that we've gone through, things that we've dealt with. I've even had to work through that, saying, well, they should have, right? But what we have to do is we can't go back and change anything in the past, right? So we have to be able to shift and maneuver. And so I think what you're talking about is amazing because now we're not stuck on, well, that should have happened or I should have done this, because that's just going to bring in guilt, shame, and unforgiveness, right? On the other hand, we can say, well, that could have happened, but it didn't happen. So now how do we move forward? And that
Exactly right.
completely changes our mindset, right?
Yep.
That is so good. I want to go back to your acronym because I really enjoyed reading about it. Um, but you have the acronym, your program surrounded by the acronym being, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote it down. So B is begin where you are, which that's always good. We have to. E is explore where you're going. I is identify your options. N, this was good. Now start. And then G is get your best life. So let's talk about those a little bit.
Sure. So begin where you are, I think, is one of the steps that often gets jumped over and overlooked.
Hmm.
So whenever we sort of identify that we want to make a change in our lives, there's an energy to it. There's a desire, whether it's something we're trying to move away from, something we're trying to get to. But in doing that, we often skip the sort of wait, but where am I? And in full, as it were.
Right.
And so if try and look up something on your phone or use the GPS in your car, it needs a signal to know where you are or it can't navigate.
Ha,
If
yes.
you look at an old fashioned, like the best map in the world, like most detailed, most accurate has ever been made, if you don't have a pin that says this is where you are, if you don't have the orientation skills to figure out where you are to begin with, it doesn't matter how detailed the map is, you can't use it for anything.
Mm,
And so I think taking stock of, okay, what are the challenges right now? But also, what are the strengths? What are the skills? What are, the different relationships and know-hows and, things that I have, built and understood in my whole life till now. Taking stock of all of that, begin where you are. Now you actually know what's in your toolkit. What are the things that maybe you can't rely on, but what are the things you can?
yeah.
And that includes recognizing what your strengths are. Uh,
Yes.
so, you know, take, world-class athletes. You don't take one of them and say, okay, you're clearly a world-class runner, but you're really slow in comparison when we put you in the water. So let's focus on your swimming. We might do some functional cross training, but we
Right.
look at what people are good at and we maximize that. And so think about a typical business, feedback reviews. It's like, well, here are your gaps, here are your weaknesses. Why focus on that? Like, if there's an issue or a problem, that's fine, but it doesn't make sense to try and fill in gaps compared to your strengths. It's how can we leverage what we're good at? So we
Hmm.
need to take stock of that. We need to look at, what am I good at? What is this other person good at? How can we use that to excel
Yes.
and go even further? So
Yes.
begin where you are.
The beauty of collaboration. That's how, like, yeah, I'm not good at everything, you know, but that's the beauty of collaboration. Yeah, it's finding your strengths, continuing to sharpen those, right? And then bringing people in that are good in those other areas that you need to be good at, and then we can always learn and evolve. And, I think eventually our weaknesses can become strengths if we desire them to. But like you said, yeah, if you have something that you're really good at, there's no reason to go away from that. And I've done that in my own life, like unintentionally, where, I've had people, and this is where you have to be careful because, there's the outside things that people will say, and this is what we have to be careful what we listen to, because sometimes we'll have people that'll come in, and it's not intentional. I don't think they're trying to take us off track. I think they're just trying to help us. But what that can do is when they say, things like, well, okay, you're really good at this, but you should do this thing too. Well, that's going to take our focus off of what we're really good at, right? What are your thoughts on that?
I think you're completely right about that. And on top of it, it's not just it takes our focus away. It's, think about, when are we our most energized? It's when we're doing things that, make sense to us and
Hmm.
we sort of like intuitively feel an affinity for. And so where do we have even more energy to contribute versus where do we feel drained? So
Yes.
back in, my previous career in academia, I collaborated with different people on different projects. And it was always interesting because my most positive collaborations were where we identified what were each of our strengths and how could we lean into that,
Mm.
rather than saying, okay, it's a joint project, we'll both do half, but like just split down the middle. That doesn't make sense.
No. Not at all. Not at all. Yeah, and that's one of the things, even in the military, we did a lot of team building exercises and things like that. And of course, I've done them outside of the military as well. And it's one of those things where, yeah, we have to learn, what are you good at? What are you naturally good at? What brings you joy? What brings this other person joy? And then how can we utilize that and bring it together to get the outcome that we desire? So I really like what you're saying there.
Glad it resonates.
Yes, definitely. So we got through the B, the E, identifying your options. What does that look like?
So let me just rewind to the E a little more,
Okay, go for it.
if I could, because explore your options, because we talked about begin where you are, really.
Hmm.
The explore your options, again, I think it's an important piece because all too often people are just trying to move away from something. But if you're saying to someone, and they're like, I want to go on vacation, great. But what does that look like? Do
Mm,
you like the beaches? Do you like the mountains? Do you want to go skiing? Do you want to go to art museums? Like, what is it that you really want?
visualization.
And all too often, again, in a society that rewards doing an accomplishment,
Hmm.
people are pursuing, promotions and raises. And, it's not to say there's anything wrong with that or you shouldn't,
Right.
but explore what's actually involved. So the person who says, well, then I'll have more money, which means I can, afford, to take, better vacations with my family. And why is that important? Well, they're the most important. Okay, but how much time do you have to spend at that higher position?
Hmm.
So you now actually have less time to spend on what you're doing the most, supposedly in the service of it.
Right.
So that's where I think there's a little bit more to the explore, what you really want, what's actually involved in each place, and identify what's really right for you.
I love that.
That's where then, if we've done the begin where you are, we've done the explore where you want to go, that's where that next piece, that I, comes in. Because identifying your options, there's multiple routes between any 2 points.
Hmm.
And so identify all of the options. Like, what are all the different ways between these places? Is it, again, using the travel metaphor, is it the most direct route? Is it the scenic route? Is it the one which lets you stop and visit different national monuments along the way? Is it the one that lets you visit, friends and family you haven't seen? Is
Mm.
it the one that lets you see, the Guinness Book of World Records, world's largest ball of twine? I don't know.
Right.
Um, but identify what your options are, and then the hidden other layer of that, identify how you've made the decisions in your life that you have found the most meaningful and fulfilling in retrospect,
Mm.
and which ones you haven't. So for you, if you look back at major pivot points, how did you actually pivot towards the things that you have found the most rewarding? And that if you had it to do over, you're like, yeah, that was a good one. For one
Um,
person, it might be pro and con list, it might be
yeah.
gut feeling, it might be talk to family and friends, but identify how you've made your best choice, then apply it to all the options.
Yeah. And I kind of take a different route to that sometimes because honestly, when I look back, it's the doors that closed that have led me to where I am now. And so it wasn't always, I didn't really know how to listen to the gut feeling for a long time in my life. And so it wasn't that, right? And sometimes it was chasing, like you said, chasing something that I thought was going to open doors in different areas, right? Yep. Been there, done that. And so for me, it's usually just the doors that ended up closing and they've led me the more I've allowed them to lead me, that's the big thing. They have led me to where, where I am now and what I'm doing now. And that's actually giving me more fulfillment in my life than I've ever had. So I've had the interesting route of, and that's what I tell people, like every door that shuts, that's not always a bad thing. And I know this now. I didn't know it back in the day, but I know it now.
Yeah, no, but I think that's a great example, because if you've identified that for yourself, you know, rather than trying to fight to keep a door open that's shutting,
I've done that
um,
before.
whether literally or whether
Yes.
just even internally, emotionally, just sort of
Yes,
being frustrated, resistant, upset, angry. If you have identified, you know what, when one shuts, that's really actually served me, you have such an easier time moving forward. So
definitely.
identifying that is so powerful, and it's a great example of it.
Definitely. Yeah. And I spent a lot of energy back in the day, trying to force my way through those doors that weren't supposed to be open, and so now when the door, because that's what I tell people, anytime we're becoming uncomfortable in our lives, we're taking risks, right? Like not every door is going to easily open for us, or it might easily open, but then it shuts, right? And so it's up to us how we navigate that. Like you were talking about with the GPS, right? It's up to us how we navigate that. And so now I think because I have so much experience with the doors closing, that now when one does, I'm like, okay. And I just keep going. But that's the thing. We have to have the experience and we have to understand that, not every door that shuts is necessarily a negative thing, just allows us
Not
to
at all.
pivot,
Yeah.
like you said. Yeah. Good
Yeah.
stuff. Good stuff.
Which brings us to our N.
Yes,
Now start.
I was just
Yep.
about to ask that one. Yeah, because that's the big one. It's the action. It's great to want and visualize and do all the things, but now what's the steps?
Yeah. And so again, just because I'm focusing on being
Hmm.
doesn't mean that I'm saying it's just about, be yourself or be authentic
Hmm.
without taking action. Because
Yes.
we do live in the world. We interact with the physical, um, psychological, emotional, spiritual, whatever you want to,
Hmm.
name. We interact with, everything around us in the context we live in and that we have to navigate in our lives.
Yes.
And if we get so stuck on trying to plan for every possible contingency and get it right, then we never move anywhere and we're
Right.
stuck for our whole life.
Yes.
But I think a really important key here is if you understand what you've done in the first three steps, you know where you are, you know where you want to go and why you want to go there, and you
Hmm.
know how you're planning to transition and why you chose that, then you don't have a problem. Because I guarantee you, even when you start, there will be detours. It's life.
Yes. I always
But
tell
if
people plan with flexibility.
But again, if you've done the other three steps, and again,
Yes.
you know where you're coming from, where you're going to, and why you're choosing the route, then you always have something to orient to. So if I'm driving home and there's road construction in a detour, I'm not lost. It
Yeah.
may be a, pain in the, but, you know, no big deal. I go
Right.
around.
Right.
It may be something different. It may be that I'm driving home and I realize, you know what? I'm exhausted. I don't feel like taking any more time than I need to. But if I stop and pick up the groceries now, it's only 10 minutes out of my way. If I have to make a separate trip tomorrow, it's going to be an extra half an hour each way.
Yes.
Again, it's not what I was planning on. It is a detour from what I'm intending, but it's done with deliberation. It's done with
Mm,
intentionality in the service of where I'm trying to get to.
yeah. So good. That is so good. So to me, when I hear you talking, it sounds like the first three steps is kind of building the strategy. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I could see that. To me, I think of the being, the whole thing as a strategic piece. But if you're going to,
Mm,
within the being framework, say, where are you really strategizing versus where are you acting,
hmm.
then that would make sense to me.
I guess I look at it that way because I've been the person where I kind of threw stuff at the wall and hoped for the best. And now now I know that's not the best thing. And so I tend to now kind of pull back and it's like, okay, this is what I desire to do. Now what are the steps for me to do that? And I write all that out. And so that's what when I was listening to you, I was like, that's pretty interesting because it's I don't think it's like complete strategy, like not the check marks, right? But I think you're helping people kind of strategize in their brains, because we do need a starting point. We can't just, I always tell people, I'm like, wishing and doing are two different things, right? And so I think what you're doing with the BE and I is you're helping people kind of see, like you said, where this is where you're at, this is where you want to go. How can you get there? Now let's begin.
In that sense, absolutely, because it's what's going to be a meaningful, fulfilling, rewarding life for you.
Hmm.
And just as I said about helping, my students figure out what were their questions and how are they going to find their own answers, this isn't students, but it's the same framework. You
Hmm.
know, what are your questions? What is going to be your fulfilling, meaningful, rewarding life? And how are
Yeah.
you going to get there? And so I'm here to support people in figuring that out for themselves because my answers aren't their answers. I'm not here to tell anyone anything.
Hmm. No, I like that. And we are supposed to educate people. Like you said earlier, I'm the same way where I'm like, I should not be coaching you forever. If I'm doing the job that I'm supposed to be doing, if I'm supporting you like I'm supposed to be supporting you and encouraging you and empowering you, then you should be able to receive that information. And some people, everybody has their own timing, right? I'm sure you encounter that a lot. But at some point, you should be able to use the information and keep going, correct?
Yeah, which is exactly what the G is. It's
Mm,
get your best life. And
yes.
it doesn't mean that, you've reached the pinnacle and you're done, but it does mean that if you actually take the time to sort of stop, reflect on the process up till now, the distance traveled up till now,
Hmm.
and consolidate everything you've learned and all the growth, then you also realize you know the cycle and you can repeat it for yourself at any point.
Hmm.
And that's not to say, because we all face challenging, things in life at different points. It's
Hmm.
not to say that if it's of service at some point in the future to check in, to get more support, but it doesn't need to be in an ongoing process. If
Hmm.
you've really understood how you made the shift in being,
Yeah.
acronym and not acronym, right?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. So I have one question. When you were a kid, were you always interested in people, how they operated and yourself? Like what made you even go into psychological anthropology?
Yeah, so growing up, my dad, my mom, and my stepmom all had doctorates in psychology.
There we go.
And
Product of your surroundings. I get it now.
yeah, in many ways, that is very much so. And as I said, undergrad, I had degrees in psychology and political
hmm
philosophy. So, how people thought about things, why people did what they did, what they thought was right. And then after undergrad, I didn't go straight into graduate school. I spent 14 months overseas, mostly working on a communal farm in Israel, but also backpacking from Sweden down to Egypt.
Okay.
Um, and what was always so interesting to me, like, yeah, I love going new places and doing new things, but it was like, what did people think about and do the same and why? And what did they think about and do differently and why?
Mm,
And that's what sort of brought me to the cultural anthropology side of it. And because it's not just about psychology from a Western paradigm, because as a field, it's rooted in
hmm
Western thought.
Right.
But psychological anthropology, that permeable border between personality and culture, where there's lots of people who think about what we would label as psychology, but to them, it's inseparable from the human experience, from health, from physical being,
hmm
and so just looking at that in a much broader context and not just through one filter was
Yes.
really appealing to me and what I pursued uh, in graduate school.
Yeah, that's good. And now you're a world traveler. So did you see yourself traveling the world for many years before you started doing it?
Yes and no. I've always enjoyed traveling,
hmm
but it was really with the resigning from my academic position,
hmm
and therefore I was no longer tied to the university, which meant I had more freedom to travel.
Yes.
That it was like, you know what? I didn't get to travel as much as I would have liked to before because it was limited to, you know, uh, academic breaks,
hmm
winter break, summer break, once in a while, a research leave. Uh, but this was an opportunity to, start traveling a lot more. And then the other part of it is, as we've already mentioned, I had been really involved in dance, partner dancing,
hmm
but with the spinal injury, and then I was just starting to walk again when the pandemic hit. And so then I really didn't get to interact with people, have a lot of physical contact, travel to
hmm
dance events for years and years.
Wow.
And so when I could travel again, I was like, you know what? You know, I don't know. I didn't have this opportunity at all for a while. I really needed to rebuild even the physical capacity
Yeah,
because, your body atrophies so quickly when
it does.
you're bedridden, and just even
Yes.
rebuilding, the ability to walk unassisted, let alone be back on a dance floor. Uh, and then, get to train with people I never got to train with, get to travel to events I could never travel to because they weren't close enough to pop out for a weekend and get back to the university. And so that's what sort of started me traveling um, much more broadly and for longer chunks of time.
hmm
And so last year was the first year I ever hit four continents, and I've repeated it this year, and I'm enjoying it.
Wow. Yeah, so for everybody that's out there, we were having a conversation before we started this, and he actually just went to Bali and now he's in Portugal. So I love that it sounds to me like you're living your best life right now.
I think I really am. And again, it's not to say everything's perfect. There are
Right.
challenges. It's real life.
Yes.
But as far as identifying what are the things that are important and meaningful to me and trying to maximize those opportunities, that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah. Well, I want to honor you because you're leading by example, and that's what we have to do. Yes. And so when I mean you've inspired me just listening to you. So I just want you to know that, definitely keep going with what you're doing. It sounds amazing and I'm very interested in keeping in touch and, making sure we follow each other, support each other. But you're just doing phenomenal things from what I can tell. And I really just everything that you've talked about today, I really hope that it resonates with the listeners out there. because these are things that we have to share, more because we all, like you said, we all have challenges. And I always tell people, you see what you see, but you don't see everything that we have to go through. And so I like that you are taking your real life, the things that you've encountered in your life, and you're now transitioning that to help others live their best life. So,
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I certainly look forward to staying in touch and happy to help out, contribute in any way I can. And just on that last point, we all face challenges. And I think it's just a matter of, do we get stuck in that sort of place of scarcity of like, well, no one helped me out, like I'm not going to spend my energy helping someone else, or what would have served me and can I do that for others?
so good. So good. And the thing about service, yeah, we can get stuck on that part. And I've done it before, because I think when a lot of, when we've had people in our lives that have hurt us, whether it was intentional or unintentional, it can be difficult to, trust or get back out there and want to serve. But I know what I've learned in my own life is the more I allowed myself to get out there and serve. And of course, we don't want to overserve. So we have to be careful with that because I've done that before too. So we have to be, the discernment has to be in place. But the more we are able to get out there and serve, and it gives us purpose. Don't you think?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think you're making a really important distinction that it's not about just serve, 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 and drain ourselves. It's, look, I had this experience and it was really challenging. Having had that, how do I want to show up?
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean sacrificing yourself, and giving more than you can. But again, like I ended up working in visual anthropology a lot. I had no training in it. It just because of what I was researching, it made sense. But so one of the best classes I ever taught was on visual anthropology because I stopped and I thought about what would have been really helpful to have learned. Oh, okay, let me put it on a syllabus. So,
Nice.
that was it. And so,
Yes.
when I was in graduate school, my advisor ended up with, life-threatening cancer and so really wasn't around
Mm,
much. That's his fault. I don't blame him,
right.
but I didn't have good advising. And so then when I became an advisor, it was like, what would have been really helpful to me? Let me do
Yes.
that.
Yes. Yeah. Taking what I always say, when I was in the military, I always say like some of the people who were put in leadership positions that did not know how to be leaders are the ones who made me want to be a better leader, right?
Yep.
And then even having coaches in life, right? Like when we didn't, or like you said, an advisor, a mentor, whatever, like whatever we didn't receive, being able to now take that and say, you know what, I didn't receive this, but I wish I had received this, this, and this, right? I could have, we don't want to say should have, but right? I could have received this. And so now how am I going to take that and bring it forward to others? So yeah, it's, I love that, and it's kind of, I always say using kind of your pain for your purpose, right? The things that we didn't get, now we can turn that around and use that for our purpose. So I really love that you're doing that, you guys. I would love to keep talking to you, but we're gonna wrap it up today. But hopefully we can, get you back at some point and get your insight as you evolve because we're constantly, I always say I'm a student of life, constantly evolving, shifting, and growing, right? And so I would love to get you back on. Thank you so much for taking the time out today. Do you have any last words that you'd like to leave with the listeners?
Um, if I had to distill it down to any one thing, it would be just think about how you want to show up.
Mm,
Again, so much of life is bigger than us, and whether it's, conflicting pressures, whether it's, overwhelming emotions, and it can get, identifying what do I want to do can be big, too big. What's my meaning? What's my purpose can be too big, but just how do I want to show up?
yeah.
Whether in this one conversation with this one person, in this one setting, how do I want to show up? Focus on that. And at least it's a like small, if the other part was strategic, let's call this the tactical piece.
There you go. I like it. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for that. You guys make sure that you reach out to him. His website is stepsalongtheway.global, which I thought that was pretty funny because you're global. Um, so good job on that. But yeah, and then, I'm sure you're all over social media. Am I correct?
Yes, I
Okay.
am. But
Yes.
also, if any listeners just want to hop on a what's your next step chat,
Hmm.
this is not even a consultation. This is not a pitch. It's just 30 minutes helping you identify your next step. Stepstochat.com, totally complimentary. Just trying to provide some service out in the world.
Awesome. Awesome. I love that. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your world traveler responsibilities and keep touching people all over the world. I just want to honor what you're doing. I want to honor how you shifted and were able to take your pain and bring it into the purpose. So, thank you so much again for your time today, Jonathan, and let's make sure to stay connected. For everyone out there, I hope you took notes. If you didn't, that's okay. Go back and listen again and take some more notes. If you're driving in your car, make sure you stop, take some notes there and just connect. We're none of us have to live this life alone. It's a choice. We have people out there, a lot of us have endured things, gone through things, we have experience with things that maybe you're just encountering and you're not sure how to make that next move. So Jonathan's one of those people that can help you out. So make sure you connect with him. And thank you for listening. Make sure you keep watching and listening and sharing. For anybody out there that needs to hear, some encouraging conversation, make sure you share this with them. And thank you so much again for your time today, Jonathan.
My pleasure, Jody. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Have a great day, everyone.